Hello, welcome to Life Matters. I'm your host, Brendan O'Connell. We take a look at the broad mosaic of the Right to Life movement, people from all walks of life. And today we have a very special guest, Dr. Scott Lively, who in more recent times, in 2014, he ran for governor of Massachusetts. He lives in the western part of Massachusetts, Springfield, although he's a peripatetic preacher and has lived in various parts of the country, Portland, Oregon, and I believe he's heading back out to California. He's with us today to take a look at how he got involved in the pro-life movement and how that has evolved into other issues that he deals with and is a leader in dealing with and fighting some very strong forces of evil. Well, welcome, Dr. Scott Lively.
Well, it's great to be here.
Dr. Lively, how did you ever get involved in the pro-life movement?
Well, I grew up in Shelburne Falls here in Massachusetts, and I was an alcoholic and a drug addict. My father had mental health problems. I retreated at the age of 12 into alcoholism and then discovered drugs, and I spent 16 years in bondage. And at the end of that time, I got down, I surrendered my life to Christ. Was healed and transformed, never had another desire to take drugs or drink ever again. And I began paying attention to the things of the Lord and reading the Bible, listening to Christian radio, and the pro-life movement was coming into strength at that point. That was the Operation Rescue was at its peak. And I was going to a church where the pastor was a strong pro-life man, former missionary to the Philippines, who was sort of retired to the big Foursquare church there in Portland. And I had my eyes opened. And long story short, I ended up getting on the mailing list of the Life Advocate magazine, which was the magazine of the rescue movement. It was put out by friends that I had made there in Portland, Paul DePerry and Andrew Burnett and Kathy Ramey and others, that they really represented the Oregon rescue movement. And the first issue of the magazine I got, I opened it up, and for the first time in my life, I saw pictures of aborted babies. And it was so horrifying to me, so shocking to me. I didn't realize that I had never thought about abortion. I'd never seen pictures like this. And I thought, how can this be happening in America? People must not know. And from that very minute, my life was changed, and I began, I was working as a contractor in those days, and within a few months I actually had left my business behind and gone full-time into trying to stop the killing of the babies, going just all by myself. I didn't even join an organization. I just started going to the abortion clinics and holding signs and talking to people, and that's how I got started.
I see. Now, was the abortion facility in Multnomah County, or which? There's three big counties around Portland: Clackamas, Washington, and Multnomah. Where was the abortion facility?
Well, there are three of them right there in Portland. And as a matter of fact, the very first, how I met these guys is I had a little rental house that I bought with another fellow contractor, a little dumpy little place out in southeast Portland. And every Saturday I would drive out there and to do a little work on fixing it up. And the Foster Road Abortion Clinic was on the way. And I was already thinking of myself as a pro-lifer, and there was this very faithful couple. They weren't married, but a man and a woman that would every week they'd be out there holding a sign that said "Honk if you hate abortion," and that was my contribution to the pro-life movement. I would lean on the horn and for a block, and I felt good about it. And then one Saturday I was going out there with my little 5-year-old son Noah, and the tenants weren't there, and I couldn't get into the house. And on the way, we'd seen a bunch of people assembling across the street in this little park with pink and blue balloons, and I sort of figured, oh, that must be a pro-life thing. So I said to my son, I said, hey, let's want to go check out? And he goes, yeah, let's do it. it turned out to be the Mother's Day March for Life, and me and Noah marched 8 miles with that group past all 3 of the abortion clinics, and he got a little plaque for the youngest boy marcher, and that's how when I got on their mailing list, and then got the magazine a couple weeks later that changed my life.
Well, now, Scott, what was it you relayed to me a story once that you decided to go out and protest by yourself in front of abortion clinics. Can you tell us that particular situation or situations?
Well, my pro-life activism evolved over time, and I was always looking for the most effective means of trying to stop women from killing their babies, to persuade them not to do it. I remember the very first time I was in that very same Foster Road abortion clinic. The first time I ever went as a prayer supporter at a rescue, a woman who was at least 6 months pregnant came down the sidewalk to go in, and I remember, I'm a fairly persuasive person, I remember doing everything I possibly could to try to get her to change her mind, including offering to adopt her baby, and she just wouldn't listen and went in, and I assumed she killed the child. And so my focus was always on what's the most effective. And finally, the last thing I did as a street activist, I went out and bought a full-body devil suit with this hideous devil mask and a cape, and I wore that, and I made a 6-foot-long styrofoam sign in the shape of an arrow, and it said, "Abortion special, kill now, pay later," with flames coming up. And so I would go to the abortion clinics and be the barker for the clinic, and come on in. I did it in a southern accent, and I called myself Bubba, which is short for Beelzebubba, and from the deep south. And so I would be there, and I'd say, "Come on in, it's a great day to kill your babies," and it would just shock people. And I would stay in character as the devil, being in the cheerleader for abortion. And I'll tell you, there's the most interesting time I did this. I was in Sacramento, and I had been teaching and doing seminars with a group of teenagers called Teens for Life, and they wanted to come out with me. And so the girls all dressed up like angels, and we all went down there together, and they went across the street from the abortion clinic. And I came a little later. I had to change in my costume back at the car, so I came down the street like 5 minutes after they were already across the street. And there were 3 pro-aborts in the driveway at the clinic there in Sacramento, 2 lesbians and a black Satanist guy with a big pentagram ring on. And the dominant head pro-abort was one of the lesbians. And literally, this was just so funny that she saw me coming down the street, and she obviously was irritated at the fact that the angels were across the street. And she started jumping up and down, going, "Oh, goody, Satan's here, Satan's here!" And she ran up to me and gave me this big hug. And I don't know, she just was kooky or something, because she thought I was there to be on their side, to counter to them. And it was perfect. And I was standing on the side of the driveway. And I was calling names and stuff at the angels. I was in character as the devil. And she said, "Oh, you don't have to stand over there. Come stand with us." So there I am standing in the driveway, right, with them, and then we're goofing around and all that. And then the first car comes to go in, and I said, "Come on in. It's a great day to kill your babies." And she just kind of looked at me, and she leaned over and whispered. She said, "That's not really a very good thing to say." And so I said, "But isn't that what we're doing?" And then she kind of looked through the eye holes, and she's going, "Are you an anti-abortion guy?" And I said, "No, I'm on your side. Would I lie to you?" And then so we went back and forth for a few more times, and then she went into the clinic, and then out comes the office manager in scrubs and the whole thing, walks down the driveway and looks me up and down, and then looks over at her and like really exasperated. She goes, "He's one of them." So I said, no, I'm not. And anyway, so they now then said, you can't stand here. So I had to go stand on the side, and then I just stood there and mocked them for it was extremely effective. And and as the women were coming in, they would see the devil and they would start crying, and it was really the most effective way to impact both. And every time I did it, the pro-aborts would all get very, very uncomfortable, and they'd cluster closer and closer together because the reality of they're on the side of the devil was just came home to them in the way that I did the performance. So anyway, that was the most fun. I finally stopped doing it after 5 or 6 times and gave my costume to a pro-lifer from Nebraska that I met at the Supreme Court when I was there. I actually made it in the courtroom to hear the oral arguments on the partial birth abortion case.
And let me ask you, now I know that I had Governor Sam Brown back on here, and he feels that, or had stated during the show that because Clinton vetoed 2 times, I believe, the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act, that gave the American society more and more familiarity with what really partial birth abortion is.
Yeah, but it doesn't seem to stop them, though, does it? I mean, what grieved me was sitting in the courtroom and hearing Justice Sandra Day OConnor talk about how gruesome the procedure was. So she actually knew what was going on. And I walked out of that courtroom believing we were going to win because of Sandra Day OConnor knew what it was, and she considered it gruesome. And then I was just floored when she went and voted to continue to allow the killing of babies in the process of being born. And so just because people see it doesn't mean that they're going to stand on the side of truth.
Right. And I believe Ronald Reagan appointed her, and over the protestations of one of the lead Arizona Right to Life women saying Sandra Day OConnor is not pro-life.
Yeah, and he also appointed, unfortunately, Kennedy. And Anthony Kennedy is the Lucifer of the Supreme Court still. He's written all 5 of the pro-homosexual majority opinions that have just gutted the nation. So Ronald Reagan was a great president, but he wasn't a great pick of Supreme Court justices.
Mm-hmm. We had one up here in New Hampshire, the fellow who I think John Sununu recommended him. He was on the Supreme Court for a while, and
Justice Souter, yeah.
Yes, Souter. He was a major disappointment, also.
Yeah. Actually, I'm not certain that Reagan did appoint Kennedy, but maybe he did. I have to go back and look at that. So I apologize to President Reagan if I made a mistake on that.
Well, I believe he did because the Senate was controlled by Democrats, and I think Reagan, I remember him saying that, now the Democrats, they couldn't turn down a Kennedy, would they? So that's...
Well, that's true. And Reagan was also, I mean, he got in by the force of his personality, but he wasn't able to completely avoid control by the elites. And that's how he ended up with George H.W. Bush as his running mate. They still were going to keep their people in holding the steering wheels, even though they had to let him in because he was so popular. But
right now,
anyway.
I'd like to ask you about because also you have been battling the homosexual movement over time, and the decision this past year that brought homosexual marriage to America. Do you think that we took the wrong approach of going state by state, and therefore it would eventually percolate up to the Supreme Court?
No, it's this. Look, I'm a conspiracy, confirmed conspiracy theorist when it comes to the attempt and pursuit of the elites for a global government. And I think that they used the sexual revolution and the abortion issue and homosexuality as a method of softening the countries, breaking their moral strength to make it easier to control, and that they don't let anything stand in their way of advancing the killing of the unborn or the promotion of sexual perversion. Nothing stops them anywhere. They just have to go. They can't go too fast because there'll be revolution. But there was no strategy that we could have followed that they weren't going to checkmate us with their power at some point.
It was my understanding that in the opinion written that they started with the privacy issue, which of course was very big in the Roe versus Wade ultimate decision. I forget who it was, someone versus Connecticut.
Griswold.
And
Griswold versus Connecticut.
And he actually, I believe, was affiliated with Planned Parenthood, Griswold, and the right to privacy, and that they used that in the decision, Obergefell decision, also, that argument.
Yeah, but it wouldn't have mattered, Brendan. They were going to do this. In fact, I'm a constitutional law attorney, but I didn't even read the Obergefell decision. I considered it completely illegitimate and void. Those two Supreme Court justices, Ginsburg and Kagan, were completely in violation of fundamental judicial ethics. They should not have been allowed to vote on that case. Both of them had conducted same-sex marriage ceremonies during the pendency of the case, which is an absolute non-starter. You cannot do that. And they should have recused themselves, and if they didn't, they should have been prevented from voting by the rest of the court. So I consider it a completely lawless decision. I don't even care what the wording was. And it's a foregone conclusion because they were going to get this somehow, and whatever the wording is, it's just rationalization. It's not based in genuine constitutional law.
Mm-hmm. Now, I noticed in reading some of the things on your website that you see a lot of parallels between Germany with homosexuality and the rise of the Nazi Party, the National Socialist Party. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And are there parallels here in the United States right now?
Well, my first book was titled The Pink Swastika, Homosexuality and the Nazi Party, which I co-authored with Orthodox Jewish researcher Kevin Abrams. We're now working on the 5th edition of that book, and there's absolutely no question. If you can read the book online, you can read the 4th edition at defendthefamily.com, and then on my blog, scottlively.net, I have the first 4 chapters of the 5th edition in beta version that you can just go and read there. And you can see that the tremendous amount of documentation we have on the thesis that the German gay subculture created and ran the Nazi Party. And Hitler himself was homosexual. Most of his inner circle were homosexual, and it's very thoroughly documented. It's just so damaging to the left that they suppress it as aggressively as they possibly can, and very few people are willing to stand up on these facts because they get smeared, and it goes against the common wisdom. So it's easy to smear people who are, offering some of this documentation without. Anyway, but in the parallels that exist today are, we don't have the same kind of militaristic society that Germany did at the time, but we do have a very powerful homosexual political movement that's dominating our political life. What's going on in North Carolina right now, for example? Governor McCrory, who is taking the brunt of the attacks because North Carolina passed a protection for women in restrooms so that transgender men can't go into the ladies' rooms. Well, the attacks that North Carolina has been taking caused the governor to come forward and say that the Human Rights Campaign is more powerful than the National Rifle Association, which is shocking to people because the NRA is recognized by both sides as the ultimate political power lobby group in the U.S. But McCrory's coming out and rightfully saying, because I've known this all along, because I've been on the front lines of this for 25 years, but there is nobody more powerful in U.S. politics than the homosexuals are. Even though a lot of what they do, it's sort of like an iceberg. A lot of it is, you don't see it. You see the tip of the iceberg, but you don't see the bulk of it. But that's exactly the case. And the same thing was true in Germany. They were the power bloc, and they as good as destroyed that country, just like they're doing here.
So you're saying that the homosexual movement, much of their activity is sub rosa, and yet
Yes.
One of their founders is from Portland, Oregon, and supposedly a 15-year-old has a lawsuit against the fellow. I don't remember his name off the top of my head right
Terry
now.
Bean.
Bean.
Terrence Bean, who is actually one of the bundlers for Obama, one of his main money raisers, an open homosexual, one of the founders of the Human Rights Campaign. He was actually being prosecuted in Oregon last year for sexual relations with a 15-year-old boy, and then he was going to go to trial on that, but then he went public offering $200,000 to the kid who was in hiding at the time, and the kid all of a sudden decided not to prosecute, and he didn't come in, and the police couldn't find him. So basically, Bean got out of being prosecuted by bribing the witness with this. I'm assuming the money eventually changed hands, but that's the ilk of the people that we're dealing with in this movement. And he's not the only one. This is fairly common for very prominent homosexual political leaders to have these kinds of issues with younger men.
Mm-hmm. And we've only got a couple minutes left, but I'd like to ask you about reparative therapy. The homosexual elites are very much against those that might get out of their homosexuality through psychological counseling. Can you speak to that? What is happening in our society right now?
Yes. Well, back in the 1950s, what's called reparative therapy was really a growing phenomenon, and there was an organization called the National Association for Research and Therapy of Homosexuality was founded by the eminent Dr. Charles Socarides, and they were championing and proving the efficacy of therapy to help people overcome unwanted same-sex attraction. And I have quite a number of ex-gay friends myself. There are thousands and thousands of ex-gays out there in our society that prove that homosexuality is not innate and unchangeable. But that the fact that that ex-gay movement even exists is extraordinarily damaging to the claims, the Born That Way claims and others of the homosexual movement. So wherever they have the power to do it, they have been putting through these bans criminalizing reparative therapy, it's so bizarre that they're getting away with it, but they're doing it in places where like California, the Democrat Party is dominated by a clique of homosexuals that are in it, and the Democratic Party itself has a super majority in both houses. So they're almost unstoppable on social policy in California, and that's where they started. That's also the place. California is the first state to mandate gay propaganda to children from kindergarten through 12th grade in the public schools. It's been like 4 or 5 years since that's now the law of the land in California, because the Democrats have the supermajority in both houses, and they followed it up with this law criminalizing reparative therapy, so that if a kid gets molested and then he starts having homosexual, unwanted homosexual feelings, his parents can't take him to a therapist now, because it's illegal for any therapist to agree with the kid that he can or should want not to have those homosexual feelings. It's fascist.
Well, that's really something. Well, Dr. Lively, our time has come to an end, unfortunately. There's so many more issues that we could speak about, but we certainly wish you well in your activities, both here in Massachusetts and also in California, where I guess you're heading to do a ministry out there.
Yes, and I want to thank you, Brendan, for having me on the show, and God bless you, God bless your listeners, and I hope that the Lord will continue to raise up people to stand for His truth here in Massachusetts.
Well, thank you very much. And we hope you enjoyed today's show and found it to be unique, informative, content-rich, truthful, and thought-provoking. Thanks for watching. I'm Brendan O'Connell, your friend for life.